Welcome back. We are closing this out with the stuff that actually sticks.
The big themes here are listening, choice, and not letting your identity trap you.
That is a brutal summary and also kind of the whole game.
She keeps coming back to the same point. People talk too much and listen too little.
Which is painful because that is also 90% of normal conversation.
Especially when someone thinks persuasion means performing intelligence.
The wild part is she says the real skill is competence, not charm.
Right? People trust calm competence way more than desperate likability.
Which is annoying if your whole personality is trying to be liked.
That is a painful mirror for half the internet.
But I do buy it, because respect lands deeper than being entertaining.
Especially when someone is scared and you are trying to influence them.
Yeah, fear does not care how funny you are.
Fear is not impressed by your brand voice.
Okay, that line is staying with me forever.
What I loved is how she framed motivation as the real lever.
Exactly. If you know what someone wants, you stop guessing and start moving.
But that can sound manipulative if you say it badly.
Everything sounds manipulative if you say it with villain music underneath it.
True, but her point is more like ethical leverage.
Like with that fraud case, greed was the open door.
She did not force it. She just understood the guy's appetite and let him walk into it.
The confidence to do that undercover is insane to me.
And she had to do it with no wire and no gun, which is cinematic madness.
I would have been making a lot of bad life choices in that car park.
You would have absolutely been the weakest undercover agent in history.
Thank you for the support, genuinely.
But it shows how much her work was about reading situations fast.
Not just reading people, but reading yourself under pressure.
Yes, because if you panic, you hand the whole room your power.
And that connects to her obsession with choice.
The choice conversation was the most uncomfortable part for me.
Because she was basically saying, some people do not want freedom.
They want the story of being trapped more than they want the responsibility of leaving.
That is a nasty sentence because it is probably true so often.
It is brutal, but it explains so much human behavior.
You can almost hear the relief people get from blaming circumstance.
Because if it is your fault, then you have to move.
And movement is expensive emotionally.
That is such a good line, annoyingly good.
But do you think she is too hard on people who stay stuck?
Maybe a little, but I think she is talking about a pattern, not a moment.
Right, everybody visits the victim mode sometimes.
The problem is when you move in and start paying rent there.
That is disgusting and perfect.
And she says trauma can become identity because it gives you community.
That hit hard, because belonging is a powerful drug.
People will keep a painful label if it gives them a tribe.
Even if that tribe keeps them small.
Even if it becomes a whole personality.
The internet has made that so much worse.
It turned suffering into a competitive sport.
And everyone wants the gold medal in hardest life.
But she was not denying real trauma or real discrimination.
That distinction matters because otherwise the whole thing becomes cartoonish.
She is saying the event is real, but the story you build around it can trap you.
Exactly. The injury is real. The self-image is optional.
That is the most liberating and annoying idea in the world.
Liberation is always annoying when it asks something of you.
Her bit about labels in criminal justice was important too.
If you tell someone they are a criminal long enough, they may start acting like it.
Same with a kid who gets called an F, or a woman reminded she is different in a room.
People underperform when they are made to feel like a category.
And she had that personal irritation about being called a female agent.
Which is fair, because nobody asks men if they enjoyed being a man at work.
Imagine that question in a boardroom. It would sound absurd.
She wanted her merit to be the story, not the demographic box.
And that is where the tension lives, because representation matters, and so does dignity.
She also told that story about the male and female standards in training.
The fact she found out later must have felt like a punch.
Especially because she chose to train to the harder standard anyway.
That is the difference between being given a seat and deciding to own it.
And then still getting judged by people who were never doing the work.
That part is what makes it rage-inducing.
Yet she keeps saying you do not have to carry every idiot's opinion.
I liked the mental bubble idea a lot.
Yeah, not in a fantasy way, but as a boundary around your energy.
Because fighting every slight gives the other person ownership of your mood.
And once they own your mood, they kind of own your day.
Still, I do think sometimes pushing back is necessary.
Totally, but she is asking whether the battle is worth the drain.
That question feels very adult, in the most exhausting way.
Adulting is just strategic ignoring with bills.
That should be embroidered on a pillow.
What did you think about the bit where underestimation became an advantage?
I think it becomes powerful when people misread you and you stay calm.
That Botswana story was such a flex without trying to flex.
The agent thinking she was staff, and she just calmly corrected him, was perfect.
The correct move is never emotional. Emotions are for later, preferably privately.
And that connects to how she handled being underestimated in rooms as a young entrepreneur.
Right, the instinct is to prove yourself through composure, not noise.
Which is hard when you are 18 and everyone else looks like they own the building.
With a fake tie and a very serious face.
The fake tie detail is doing a lot of work there.
The other thread I keep thinking about is emotional control.
She basically says the world keeps offering you triggers, and you choose the response.
That is the whole game, honestly.
Which is annoying because it means you cannot blame the weather forever.
You can blame the weather for a little while, to be fair.
She also talked about wanting people to move forward only if they actually want to.
That was almost a filter for therapists, mentors, and friends.
Yes, because not everyone wants advice. Some people want an audience.
Cheaper than therapy, louder than therapy, worse than therapy.
That is alarmingly accurate.
If you are the helper, you need to detect the difference fast.
Otherwise, you become the unpaid stage for someone else's spiral.
That is a terrible business model.
And she would probably say that some spirals are identity-preserving.
Which is a harsh thing to admit because it means comfort can hide inside misery.
Sometimes the pain is familiar enough to feel like home.
Damn, that landed.
Then the final note is basically sovereignty, right?
Yeah, becoming bulletproof is really about owning your inner room.
Not numb, not closed, just harder to knock off center.
That is way more useful than pretending nothing affects you.
And that feels like a good place to end the series.
Final episode, and somehow the lesson is still just pay attention and grow up.
Rude but fair.
Seriously though, this whole run has been about power without performance.
And about choosing not to hand your life over to the loudest story in the room.
That is the series, honestly, wrapped up neatly and a little aggressively.
We did it without becoming a motivational poster, which I respect.
Barely, but yes.
Thanks for riding through the whole thing with us.
We will catch you on the next one. Welcome back. This final stretch is all about choice, persuasion, and not handing your mind to everybody else.
And Abby basically says the loudest person is usually the least persuasive.
That is such a brutal lesson for modern life, honestly.
Because everybody thinks persuading means talking harder.
Right. When it usually means shutting up and paying attention.
That part about listening first is almost annoyingly simple.
Annoyingly simple is always the useful stuff.
And competence matters more than being liked, which is such a relief.
Yes, because chasing approval is a full-time job with terrible pay.
And no pension and no respect.
What I liked is she kept coming back to respect, not charm.
Exactly, because people can smell fake charm from miles away.
Especially if you are over-explaining like a guilty robot.
A guilty robot is wildly specific, but yes.
Her whole point is that motivation is the real lever.
Which is why that fraud case was so wild. Because greed opened the door.
The passport ring stuff was insane, though.
They did not chase him with force. They baited the pattern.
And she understood exactly what he wanted before he did.
Which is honestly more threatening than a gun in some rooms.
That is such a cold sentence, but you're right.
The key idea is that persuasion is not manipulation if it starts with reality.
Okay, but people abuse that word all the time.
Sure, but she is talking about reading what is already there.
Yeah, not inventing desire, just locating it.
That feels like the whole Secret Service mindset, honestly.
And then she pivots into the bigger thing, which is ownership.
Oh, the choice part is the most uncomfortable part.
Because people hate being told they have agency.
They want a diagnosis, not a mirror.
They want a villain and a TED Talk.
Exactly. They want the world to be responsible for them.
Her friend's story was so telling, because the person could leave the job.
And was offended by the idea of leaving, which is almost artful.
That is such a strange kind of comfort, staying powerless on purpose.
It becomes identity. And identity can be a hiding place.
That whole repeated I thing was fascinating.
Yeah, because she is saying emotional language can signal fixation.
I mean, that can sound a little clinical if you do it wrong,
Totally, but the pattern she described is real in conversation,
like the person who only speaks in damage.
and somehow keeps finding new reasons to stay in damage.
The wild part is how trauma can become community,
That is the sticky part nobody wants to admit.
because then leaving the trauma feels like leaving the group.
Exactly. You lose belonging, language, maybe even purpose.
And then people compete over who hurt more.
The Olympics of pain, basically.
Horrible, but yes, that is the energy.
She keeps saying trauma is what happened to you, not who you are.
That line lands because it gives people back their shape.
And then there is the whole sovereignty thing, which I love.
It is basically, do not let the world draft your personality.
That is such a good sentence, and also a little rude.
Good sentences usually are.
Her undercover stories also made that theme feel real, not abstract.
The fake Eastern European accent, the no-wire decision, all of it was nuts.
She was balancing identity work and physical risk at the same time.
And that detail about sneakers under dress clothes was genius.
Practical chaos, I respect it.
What got me was how calm she sounded about being in danger.
Calm is probably built, not natural in that job.
She kept saying competence gave her confidence.
Which makes sense, because if you know your role, fear shrinks.
Or at least it stops taking the steering wheel.
Then she talks about being underestimated, and that part hit harder.
Because that is not theoretical for either of them.
She gets underestimated as a woman, and he gets underestimated as a black man.
And both of them are basically saying, fine, let me work.
The most savage response is performance.
That is the cleanest revenge ever.
But I liked that they did not pretend prejudice is imaginary.
Yes, they were careful not to flatten reality.
They were basically saying, this is real, but I am not building my home there.
That is the strongest version of resistance, honestly.
The Botswana story was such a good example of that tension, too.
The monkey warning was somehow the least surprising part.
The hotel monkeys had better boundaries than some people.
And that moment where she had to tell the new agent who she was.
He walked in ready to explain the building to his supervisor.
Classic male confidence, just applied completely incorrectly.
Completely incorrectly is doing a lot of work there.
But she did not melt into offense, she just corrected the frame.
That is a skill, though, not reacting to every slight.
Especially when the energy cost of reacting is so high.
That border fight metaphor was actually really good for that reason.
Yeah, because anger can become a second job.
And then the system still wins while you are busy burning yourself.
Which is rude of the system, but consistent.
Horribly consistent.
I think the lesson across this whole episode is energy management.
And not confusing dignity with constant confrontation.
That is a great distinction, actually.
Because dignity can be quiet and still be powerful.
And that ties into the book title perfectly, Becoming Bulletproof.
Not invincible, just harder to shake.
That is way healthier than pretending you are untouchable.
Also, the body question at the end was a nice surprise.
Her answer was simple, which made it stronger.
Pregnancy, recovery, listening to the body, all of that grounded the whole thing.
After all that armor talk, the body still gets the final vote.
The body is always the boss, unfortunately.
That is such a good place to end this series, though.
We started with power and ended with responsibility.
And somewhere in the middle, we learned not to romanticize suffering.
Which, honestly, is a life upgrade for everyone.
Big upgrade, zero subscription fee.
Thanks for being with us through the whole run.
We will catch you on the next one and hopefully less traumatized.
Welcome back. We're closing this one out with persuasion, choice, and not handing your life to the world.
And the wild part is most of it starts with listening, not talking.
Which is annoying because everyone wants a magic phrase.
People want a script for being human.
Abby basically says the first move is to figure out what drives somebody.
Yeah, greed, fear, belonging, ego, whatever actually moves them.
Not what they say in a polished LinkedIn voice.
Exactly. Not the clean public version they rehearse.
That's why talking too much is such a rookie mistake.
Because if you're busy performing, you're not collecting anything real.
And the competence piece is so underrated.
Respect usually comes from being useful, not being loud.
Finally, a worldview with zero room for nonsense.
Being pleasant is nice, but being competent is rarer.
She really keeps coming back to emotional control, too.
That part matters because people test your reactions constantly.
If you lose your cool, they learn exactly where to push,
And then they own the rhythm of the conversation.
which is terrifying when you think about it.
Human beings are basically very expensive button machines.
That is the least romantic sentence ever spoken.
True, but it's useful.
The fraud story was insane, though.
Selling passports and birth certificates to bad actors is next-level grim.
And she understood the suspect by reading his greed, not his speeches.
That's the thing. The lure was never the paperwork. It was the profit.
And she basically walked into a trap with sneakers on.
That's such an absurd detail, but also the smartest detail.
Because if you look too official, the whole thing collapses.
Undercover work is such a brutal test of presence.
She had to sound believable, move believable, and think fast under pressure.
And she had no wire, no gun, nothing, which is actual insanity.
That is not bravery. That is one wrong turn from disaster.
But it also shows how much trust the work demanded.
The other huge theme here is underestimation.
Yeah, both as a liability and a weapon.
People assume the tiny person in the room is the intern.
And then that person is actually running the meeting.
Humiliation by competence is my favorite genre.
It's a very specific and very satisfying genre.
But she also made a bigger point about not getting trapped in the insult.
Right, because if you fight every slight, you spend your life bleeding.
That's the bubble idea, just protecting your energy.
I actually think that's one of the hardest skills in adult life.
Especially when the thing you're dealing with is probably real.
Exactly. Not imagining it doesn't make it less exhausting.
The distinction is whether you turn it into your whole identity.
That's where this conversation gets sharp, because identity can become a trap.
Abby's point about repeated self-focus was interesting there.
The constant I can signal someone stuck inside their own pain.
And once pain becomes a home, people decorate it.
That is a devastating line, but yes, they really do.
The trauma identity piece is uncomfortable because it's so socially rewarded now,
People can get community, purpose, and status from suffering.
which is exactly why it sticks.
If giving it up means losing belonging, a lot of people won't.
That is such a dark little bargain.
The human mind loves a dark little bargain.
You always make it sound so cheerful.
I'm trying to keep us emotionally alive here.
What I love is that she doesn't deny trauma. She just refuses to worship it.
That's the distinction, and it's massive.
The choice conversation hit me too.
You mean the part where people are offended by having agency.
Yes, which is such a brutal sentence to hear about yourself.
But sometimes people would rather be trapped than responsible.
Because responsibility means you can't keep blaming the room.
And blame is easier than movement.
She keeps saying people don't always want fixing, they want witnessing.
Or they want to stay exactly where they are and feel understood there.
That's such a brutal thing to admit out loud.
But it's also really common.
And if you're the helper, you have to spot that fast,
Otherwise, you become the unpaid emotional renovation team.
which is the worst job in the world.
No benefits, terrible hours, infinite scope creep.
This episode is secretly a masterclass in boundaries.
It really is, because boundaries are how you stay sane.
And they're not always polite, which people hate.
Polite and effective are not the same thing.
Thank you, because people confuse that constantly.
Yeah, sometimes the kindest thing is a hard no.
I also keep thinking about the immigrant angle and how early that awareness starts.
Seeing your father get profiled changes your nervous system forever.
And then you still have to decide what you do with that reality.
Do you fight everything, or do you pick your battles like a grown-up?
Usually the grown-up option is the boring one, annoyingly.
The boring option is often the profitable one.
The label theory bit was huge too.
Once you slap a label on someone, they start living toward it.
And then the institution calls that evidence, which is wild.
It becomes self-fulfilling, and everyone acts surprised.
The oldest scam in civilization.
Honestly, yes.
I liked that she pushed back on being treated like a token hire too.
Because she earned the seat and did the work.
And nobody likes having their competence minimized as a diversity checkbox.
It can make you want to burn the whole room down.
Professionally, of course.
Very diplomatically, with a smile and a receipt.
But then she made that adjustment. Prove yourself on the standards that matter.
That part is almost annoyingly disciplined.
She found out the standards were different and went into training like a machine.
That is such a dangerous level of motivation.
And also a reminder that resentment alone never gets you stronger.
Exactly. It might get you fired up, but it doesn't get you fit.
The whole final message feels like this: own your life, but don't make it a shrine to pain.
And don't waste your oxygen trying to fix every person who enjoys being stuck.
That sentence should be on a mug and also a warning label.
Both, ideally.
It's such a practical philosophy, though. Listen better, choose better, react less.
And remember that not every slight deserves a courtroom in your head.
That is maybe the cleanest way to say it.
Which brings us to the end annoyingly fast.
A good ending, though, because it leaves you with more agency than before.
That's the whole point of this series, honestly.
We started with power, and we ended with responsibility.
And a very healthy distrust of drama.
Which should probably be everyone's new hobby.
Thanks for hanging with us through all 4 episodes.
We appreciate you, and we will see you in the next one.
Welcome back. This last one is all about agency, persuasion, and not handing your life to the room.
And also the weird truth that the loudest person is usually the least persuasive.
That is such a brutal Secret Service lesson, because talking more can make you weaker.
It makes sense, though, because listening tells you what people actually want.
Most people do the opposite and just audition their own personality.
They walk in and start doing emotional karaoke.
That's exactly it, and then they wonder why nobody moves.
Her point was competence mattered more than being liked, which is refreshing.
Finally, a sane adult enters the chat.
And respect plus emotional control beats this desperate need to be agreeable.
That part hit me, because people confuse likability with influence all the time.
Influence starts when somebody feels understood, not entertained.
Which is why persuasion is really a listening problem in disguise.
That sentence should annoy every self-help guy who loves the sound of his own voice.
It's personal for some of them, honestly.
The other big thing was choice, because she kept pushing back on victimhood.
Yeah, and that is uncomfortable because choice means responsibility.
People love saying they are trapped when they are actually just unhappy.
Trapped by the job they applied for, interviewed for, and accepted.
Brutal, but yes, sometimes the prison has a very good salary.
And a nice title, which somehow makes suffering look professional.
Her point was not that trauma is fake, just that helplessness can become addictive.
That is the uncomfortable part, because being powerless can become an identity.
Exactly, and then you stop wanting solutions because solutions threaten the story.
That is such a nasty trap because the story can feel like safety.
It gives people community, language, and sometimes even purpose.
That was one of the smartest bits, honestly, because trauma can become social currency.
Which is insane, but also completely believable in the internet age.
Everybody wants to win the Pain Olympics now.
I hate how accurate that is.
And she tied it to gangs, extremist groups, all that belonging stuff.
Because people do not join things only because they are evil. They join because they want a home.
Yeah, that was actually sad, not just clever.
Her whole thing is basically sovereignty without isolation.
That is a very good phrase, and it sounds expensive somehow.
It does, like a book jacket quote from a woman who terrifies liars.
Speaking of terrifying liars, the undercover passport case was wild.
Wild is underselling it, because she was basically walking into a predator's den.
And without a wire, without a gun, just trusting her red and her training.
That detail made it even crazier, because vulnerability was the strategy.
I still cannot believe the whole plan was built around her looking believable.
Which is rude to say, but also the whole point of undercover work.
Exactly. The job description is basically, please be underestimated.
And then she used the suspect's greed against him, which is almost too elegant.
That's the part I love, because motive is usually the door in.
He wanted money, and she gave him enough rope to keep escalating.
Just a little bit of criminal customer service.
Please do not phrase it like that.
No, but honestly, that is persuasion too, just in a terrifying form.
The same principle applies everywhere, because people reveal themselves through motive.
Which is why she kept saying competence matters, because people trust outcomes.
Not vibes, not performance, outcomes.
That should be on a billboard outside every chaotic office.
And maybe outside every relationship too, if we are being honest.
Especially relationships, because people often want fixing more than honesty.
She was ruthless about that, saying some people do not want help at all.
They want attention, witness, and a permanent excuse.
Or they want to stay in the identity because it protects them from change.
That is the actual horror, because change means you lose the costume.
And people get weirdly attached to the costume.
Some people would rather defend the costume than save the person.
She kept contrasting real hardship with the performance of hardship.
Yeah, and that is where it gets messy, because pain is real and still can be used.
That distinction matters, because you can acknowledge harm without worshiping it.
That's a great line, and also a very unsexy truth.
Unsexy truths are usually the useful ones.
The identity piece also explained why she noticed repeated self-focus in people.
Constant I language is such a small thing with a big signal.
It sounds tiny until you realize someone's whole world is just their wound.
And then every conversation becomes a mirror instead of a bridge.
That is beautiful and depressing at the same time.
She also talked about adrenaline addiction, which was surprisingly human.
Because chaos can feel like aliveness if you grew up around it.
And then calm starts to feel suspicious, which is terrifying.
Yeah, peace can feel boring to damaged people.
Or unsafe, which is even sadder.
The most interesting thing to me was how often she reframed power as choice.
Because if you can choose, then you cannot fully blame the world.
And if you cannot fully blame the world, you have to get involved in your own life.
Which is the part everybody agrees with in theory and avoids in practice.
Self-help is always somebody else's responsibility until Tuesday.
The hardest part was probably the discrimination conversation, because that got real fast.
Yeah, because she was not denying prejudice, just refusing to let it narrate her.
That is such a sharp distinction, and honestly, it is a hard one to live.
Especially when the world keeps trying to hand you a smaller story.
She pushed back on that by saying, if it's your performance, fine, but own the standard.
And then she went and trained harder than everyone just to make the point impossible.
That is such a very annoying winner move.
Extremely offensive to mediocrity.
But I respected how she held both sides, because she did not romanticize any of it.
Right. She said some women used the lower standard and were fine with it.
And she did not mock them, she just said it was not her path.
That nuance is rare now because everybody wants a slogan instead of a stance.
The same goes for underestimation, because she turned being overlooked into an advantage.
That's the thing. When people underestimate you, you get room to move.
If you are calm enough not to make their bias your fuel.
That border control example you shared from your own life fits perfectly there.
It does, because fighting every slight drains the exact energy you need for your life.
And sometimes the system is real, but your reaction is still your responsibility.
That is the whole point of the bubble, I think.
Yeah, mental armor without becoming numb.
You protect the space, but you do not hand over the steering wheel.
Which is such a good final message for this whole series, honestly.
We started with power and ended with ownership, which feels right.
And a healthy disrespect for chaos, which should be taught in school.
Seriously, imagine a curriculum on boundaries and not feeding drama.
Maybe the real flex is just not volunteering for other people's confusion.
And being able to read motive before you read the room.
That's a perfect note to end on, because this whole thing was about seeing clearly.
Thanks for staying with us through all 4 episodes.
Seriously, it meant a lot, and we hope you leave a little harder to manipulate.
Be well, stay sharp, and we will catch you in the next one.